As we start the year 2026, among other things, I think it's important to go back in time to look at why certain people in certain nations succeeded. In this context, for example, we used to study about the Greek mythology. And one of the greatest philosophers at the time was Socrates. And he's got a famous line I like, where he says, I quote, "Others are brave out of ignorance. When they stop to think, they begin to fear. But the person who can best be truly accounted brave is the one who knows the meaning of what is sweet in life and of what is bad, and goes out unstopped to face of what is to come." Unquote. You could see there that Socrates was a man of bravery, was a man who was not perturbed by the immediate situation. He was a visionary, always focused into the bigger picture. The other time I came across books written by William Shakespeare, I admired the depth of his writing because it was a reflection of his thought, a reflection of his intellect, and a reflection of the value of that man. One of the lines I like in his book, Julius Caesar, quote, "There is a tide in the affairs of men. Taken in the flood leads on to fortune. On such a full sea are we now afloat. We must take the current while it flows. Omitted, all the voyages of thy ship are bound in shallows and in miseries." Unquote. What Shakespeare basically was saying, there is a chance in the life of a person. We all get opportunities, but once you miss that opportunity, you are less likely to get it again. I remember when we were young, as teenagers at the time, there was a leader of the former homeland, Dr. L.L. Sebe, who used to say, "Umdu ithuba ulifumana kube kanye ebomini. You only get a chance once in life." You look into countries like Nigeria, for example. There's a famous writer there, I like his work, the late Chinua Achebe. One of the greatest lines is, he says, "They put a knife on the things that held us together, and we're fallen apart." Unquote. So he was trying to say that as a nation, we should be very sensitive and alert in terms of what breaks us apart. So it's very important, even us as individuals, as groups, as families, to try to identify things that are holding us back. Even if these things have been happening in this family for generations. For example, I used to say, I cannot be beaten by what defeated my father. And I'm sorry to make this example of Lwakanda Gamla. When alcohol defeated him, his sons made a vow that what became the weakness of their father, they will use it as their strength. You come to our country, South Africa. We've got heroes like Utatu Mandela. And when I read his work, The Long Walk to Freedom, there's a line I like in this book where he says, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the conquer over fear." So what was basically saying that our lives should not be ruled and governed by fear. We should not live a fear of pursuing our dreams, our aspirations, our visions. Even if we don't, it doesn't mean that bad things will not happen. In my other video, for example, I was talking about ulwaluko, where one of the most important things in the culture of AmaXhosa was the man's ability to endure pain, not to endure for the sake of enduring it, but to endure with a clear objective of looking to the future. You look at Utata Sobukwe in this book written by Podgard. One dominant theme here about Utata Sobukwe is the fact that this was a man who had the ability to endure pain. He was the epitome of these men who were produced by AmaXhosa in that rite of passage to manhood. Even other people do acknowledge his ability to endure pain, the fearlessness that he had. In isiXhosa, they say, lala ngenxeba. So that was Sobukwe then at his best. Now, you look, for example, into a country like Russia. I read this book some time back, Stalin. I know that there are a lot of other people who don't like Stalin for a number of reasons. But Shakespeare used to say, I quote, "At the evil that men do lives after them, but good is often buried with their bones," unquote. My approach in life is that no one is perfect, but I should always look at the good things about that person. There are a lot of people who are my heroes, but they are not the saints. They are not the people who are super perfect. They've got their own problems and mistakes and so on. But I always look at the positive side. Hence, even when I was a student, I always liked my teachers. We used to have a teacher, Mr. Mqoli, Duma Mqoli. Oh, he was the finest teacher during that time. Mr. Mqoli, we did not fear him. We respected him. He was a man of honor. You know, his mannerism, the way he carried himself, the way he communicated. One of his famous lines he used to utter is, "You can dodge and dodge and keep on dodging, but you can never dodge the consequences of dodging," unquote. Imagine. And I kept that all my life. Coming back to Stalin, one thing I like about him is the fact that he did two things in history. One, this was the man who was able to avenge to avenge the invasion of Russia by Germany. Russia did not see it coming when the Second World War exploded. But when they were attacked, he was able to gather the Russians, reorganize themselves. In 1945, whilst the Allied forces were fighting in North Africa, in places like Alamein, it was the Red Army of Stalin who marched into Berlin, which marked the end of the Second World War. Secondly, one thing I admire about him was his ability to transform Russia from an agrarian country to a super country. Now, let's come back home. As you know that one of the things that people know me for is the book Triangle of 100 Years Wars. A friend of mine, Uzukile Vokwana, is always pressurizing me to say, Msutu, come up with lessons that people can learn from this book. Diabulela Chawe. If you look into these 100 Years Wars, they were led by Nkosi Chungwa, Nkosi Ulanga, Nkosi Undlambe, Nkosi Mdushane, uMakhanda kaNxele, Nkosi uMaqoma, uKumkani uSandile, uKumkani uHintsa, Nkosi uNcaphali. But if you look at these leaders across these generations, you ask yourself, what made AmaXhosa to be able to sustain 9 wars over 100 years with only spears? Yet they were fighting an enemy with professional army, an enemy with superior firepower, with artillery, with the best generals, actually. I think for me, my observation that AmaXhosa did three things well, very well. And those lessons are still applicable even today. One, AmaXhosa knew that they were fighting a strong enemy. They knew the weaknesses and the strength of the enemy. So what they did, one, they dictated the terms of engagement. What does it mean? They will always decide where, when, and how to fight the war. And that gave them a competitive advantage. Because the enemy was always underestimating them. These are just savages with spears. But these men were smart. So by dictating the terms of engagement, they would always make sure that they were taking advantage of the geographical mountains where they decided to wage those wars. Secondly, AmaXhosa, one thing that I think they were so dangerous about it. The moment they decide to fight, they never lost the war. If they decide. You look at the War of Inza. When Smith faced Maqoma on the shores of the Fish River, I wouldn't even want my worst enemy to be there. Those two men were some of the finest soldiers I've ever seen in the history of mankind. So what Smith did, he organized his armies into three columns, 1, 2, 3. Maqoma looked at him. He overstretched it into 10 columns. So by spreading his army into a bigger and a larger geographical area of Maqoma, he basically overstretched the British army and rendered the artillery obsolete. 3. The victories of AmaXhosa were not attained through the superior firepower, not at all. They were attained through the application of a brilliant strategy. As I said, that AmaXhosa, what they will do, they will make sure that they position themselves in these difficult mountains. They will establish supply lines to the battlefield. They will deploy women as informers. They will always attack using what they call bush warfare. Those are the people that we can learn from. As I said, that the topic of my talk today is going back in time. I think if we want to become better people, a better country, we should always learn from the best of the best. We should always look at our heroes. They may be gone, but their strategies are still alive. And then we should go back and learn and study what is it that made them to be great people. In closing, I often argue that excellent education is not enough if we do not teach them the essence of who they are. Thank you.